Hope you had another good coffee break. We have two new presenters to the community. They're political researchers rather than engineers. Which is good, because we like diversity. So we have two doctors, Sofie and Signe, and they're going to talk about the political economy of the internet, challenges for research. So over to you. Have a happy half hour.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're really happy to be here. Thank you for having us. We're researchers. We work, our day job is research at the University of Copenhagen. And then we also have a think tank, the Think Tank for Digital Infrastructures, together with a third partner, who's not here today, but basically running that shop. Also in our day jobs, we do a lot of teaching and educating. And we have this study program that we started about 10 years ago, which means that we have students that spend half of the time with us at communication research and the other half of the time at computer science over at the Faculty of Science. So we have these candidates that we spend most of our times with that come out as these kind of intermediaries, or perhaps positioned in a knowledge gap between what we do at communication and then and then what they do over at computer science, and then what people end up coming out into the industry and doing, probably with some of you guys. I'm sure you hired some of our candidates over the years. We also sit in our day jobs in a center called Center for Tracking and Society, which is somewhere between political research, social science research, humanities research, but definitely not engineering or computer science. So what we do both in the think tank and in our research, and by being here today, is that we work on knowledge dissemination when it comes to digital infrastructures or political and economic structures around the internet. So we do a lot of work with policymakers, regulators, and different citizen groups when it comes to digital infrastructures. And this is, a lot of it is simply just raising awareness about digital infrastructures and political and economic structures around them. So where we come from, we are typically the people in the room, or no, 99% of the time, we are the people in the room with the most technical expertise, day in and day out, Sofie and I. So it feels a bit daunting to be here today, because we're definitely not the people with the most technical expertise here, by far. So we don't need to remind you guys that when we talk about digital infrastructures and when we talk about the internet, it is actually a material thing. But day in and day out, when we talk to politicians, when we talk to citizens, when we talk to students and our colleagues, we have to say this like every Tuesday or something. Don't forget, it's a material infrastructure. But surely we don't have to say it in this room, but we wanted to keep it here just to say a little bit about how we feel up here.
Yeah, so I will take over with some hopefully not that boring research stuff. But this is basically what we have been working on for the last decade or so, is understanding the shift from what we call an analog communication system to a current situation where we have a largely digital communication system. And what this entails, of course, and many of you will know this story, but now I will put it kind of into research words, because it's an important outset for the research that we do. So looking at this historic communication system that you probably all remember, we had different infrastructures supporting different types of communication, which were controlled by largely different markets. Of course, there were overlaps, and also had different political regimes regulating how these infrastructures developed and how the markets developed. I think what's important to say here, also for what we're going to talk about today, is that this was a very monitored communication system. So we had a lot of also publicly available data about what was going on, how these infrastructures looked, how people used them, and also about the market structures and the ownership structures surrounding them. So what the basic outset or problem that we work with in our research broadly is what happens when all these different technologies and different markets are gradually being taken over by digital technologies and of course digital corporations. And in research, and I guess also in policy, we are still in the process of actually trying to figure out what are the most important components to look at here when we want to understand these technologies that take over from the analog system, and also who are the most important market actors and what do they do. In fact, so that is basically what we're going to talk about today, is how we work research-based on mapping out and understanding, creating data and knowledge about this shift in power and about this digital ecosystem or communication system that is still evolving and that we have talked about all day, I guess. So back to you, Signe.
Yes. So we developed a strategy for non-technical people like ourselves, at least here, that we tentatively call follow the data. So follow data streams in order to figure out what technologies to look at when we want to survey political and economic structures around the internet. And what we did quite basically was that Sofie was in Norway on a research day, I was in Denmark, and we started discussing how come we can talk to each other day in and day out. What has changed? How would we have talked to each other 20 years ago or even 10 years ago? And then we started building this figure in our head. We called her Beate for reasons I cannot remember. And Beate wants to do a lot of things with the internet. She wants to book an appointment with her doctor, she wants to check online news, she wants to watch television, she wants to type her husband, she wants to do a lot of things. And when Beate wants to do all these things, she's reliant upon a range of different technologies that you guys know better than us. We've omitted a lot of them here for basic research purposes, but at least Beate, she needs some kind of last mile connection, some kind of access networks that she can link to in order to get online to do whatever Beate wants to do. Those access networks are also connected to backbone infrastructures, some of them we've talked a lot about today already, that allow her traffic to travel across the global internet. Also, Beate is also not a very technical person, so Beate really needs different kinds of applications and interfaces that allows her to do all these things. She can't code her way through it. She needs different kinds of applications running on the internet with interfaces that she can interact with. And finally, Beate is dependent upon data in the most basic way, data packages being routed back and forth, but also all the different kinds of tracking data that is also, I guess, one of the basic components of modern commercial internet communication. So this is a slightly, I know some of you are probably imagining a different stack, but this is how we do it at Humanities. We boil it down to these 4 components. And then what Sofie and I did was that we tried to map out, not just Beate, but different kinds of societies, how they rely on different internet infrastructures, how those infrastructures are controlled, and how they are regulated or not regulated. A lot of the time, which was also mentioned earlier today, stuff isn't regulated. And luckily enough, we're not politicians, so we're not here to decide if they should or should not be regulated, but we're here to provide knowledge that allows people in power to take decisions or not. So what we did was that we took these 4 different layers, so these different parts of the data stream, and then we looked at the infrastructures. So what kinds of access networks exist in different contexts for Beate? That's Denmark, but it could be other places. what are the existing backbone networks, what are the existing applications, and what are the existing tools for collecting and distributing digital communication data. Then we looked at the different market actors. So who owns and controls access networks, backbone networks, and so forth down the line. Also to look at what has also been a theme today, cross-value chain ownership and distribution that is largely omitted from a lot of public talk. We talk about the effects of social media, the harms towards children with all the screens, and mis and disinformation, but we largely outside of a room like this don't discuss Google as anything other than a search engine. And then we looked at different regulatory frameworks. So how does the state regulate or not digital access networks and so forth across these different infrastructures? We've done this in several contexts. We've brought a case here today that we'll hopefully get to, where we compared the different Nordic states, so the largest Nordic states, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, to look for differences in how these digital communication systems look like. But we've also done it in places very far from here, so places like Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover, Myanmar after the coup in 2021, Somalia, where similar stuff is also happening, and where the internet plays a very different role than it does in these Nordic welfare states that we'll talk about today.
Yeah, so as Signe hinted at, one of the strengths of this approach, which can seem very broad, probably to many of you, and is, but one of the strengths is that it exactly allows for this kind of comparative analysis, where we can look at what are the differences or the scope of variation in the ways that different types of digital communication systems are evolving around the world and also historically. So we were asked to actually also to say a bit about the methods. So we will emphasize here the types of data that we use and the methods we apply in order to create data sets that allow for these types of comparative analysis. And for the first layer, that's actually the most easy part, because we have quite a lot of different databases and publicly available data sources that provide information on access networks. So what types of connections are available in different parts of the world, what kinds of subscriptions do people purchase, and of course also which companies supply these different internet connections. So we rely on, for instance, Eurostat, but also on the national tele regulators that, in the Nordic context at least, collects information on a 6-month basis, as far as I remember. So we have quite reliable information on this many years back in time that we are able to compare. I think one of the things that we're talking a lot about at the moment, and that we are also getting a lot of inspiration for here in this room, is how can we get it darker than this? Of course, the number of subscriptions is a very superficial indicator for how the access network infrastructures actually look like. So if any of you have ideas for how we, for instance, can look at the market structures surrounding cell phone masts or other kinds of more dark access network infrastructure, we are very interested in hearing that. We're constantly haunting or looking for these types of data sets that allows us to compare across contexts. And we already got some today, actually, about the data center industry, so that's great. But just moving on to the next part, we've also been working on collecting data about the backbone layer and backbone infrastructures. And there, as some of you might know, we have also very nice resources from, for instance, ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, that collect information about submarine cables and actually also terrestrial connections, about ISPs, internet exchange points, and so forth, that allows us to build these data sets of how many cables, for instance, go into the context of Denmark and how long are they, who owns them. For instance, we have seen a historical shift from the legacy telecommunications operators building these submarine cables in the 1990s and zeros to the hyperscalers, you call them here, sometimes we call them big tech, also getting into this industry. And it's really interesting to compare that across context and across historical periods. Am I forgetting something, Signe?
No?
No?
Then I'm forgetting too. Then we get to the application layer, and I understand that applications can mean a lot of things in this room. What we've looked into are operating systems, browsers, websites, and apps that Beta needs to do all those things on the internet that she wants to do. And before I started working as a researcher, back when I was a student, I worked with media measurement. So measurements of old school radio and TV when it came to audiences and different kinds of audience bases. And we had systems in place for that in Denmark and in the US and a lot of places of the world that were quite reliable. It was a kind of everyone measures everyone basis, these systems. And they were used both by research, but also a lot by the industry. Then came, well, World Wide Web. then came something like streaming and disrupted these kinds of measurement systems. A lot of alterations were made to sort of account for what goes on outside regular broadcast TV, but it never really got as good as it once were. And that's also the reality that we've been facing when we've been looking into market distributions when it comes to operating systems, when it comes to browsers, but also when it comes to top lists of apps and websites, time spent, and so forth. And I bet a lot of you, through your customers, have access to this kind of data, but we don't at the universities. We've been using different kinds of databases to get to different kinds of top lists. The one we used the most was Amazon, that had global ratings for the web. But they closed that service down, probably because it wasn't really useful for Amazon anymore. And then we were left kind of in the dark, and then we had to resort to a lot of other different types of data sources. And then finally, and here it becomes even more complicated to be a humanities scholar, when it came to the different kinds of data services inside, for instance, websites and apps, we again had to revert to different reverse engineering technologies. So placing a computer at the university, opening so many web pages, also web pages that shouldn't be opened at the university, and and tracking all the different cookie calls back when we were looking at web pages, and later on now where we mostly work in the realm of mobile apps, opening up APKs, charting for different SDKs, domain calls, and so forth. This is a really tedious business. We have one PhD student alone just working on this for us to get any kind of insights into the kinds of systems that these applications rely on. And I bet all of you know this, but there are some real giants when it comes to this layer. There are some that most people will revert to if they want to build an app, for instance. Yes, okay. We have a little time. So using all these different data sources, this was just a few examples of the ones that we've been using. We've been building really big data sets. And the case that we brought as an example today were the Nordic welfare states and comparisons between them also over time. Historically, how did the internet come about in the Nordic context? How is it owned and controlled? How is it regulated? And as Sofie mentioned, when we look at broadband markets or access networks, we see a lot of, I guess, a lot of employers in here, a lot of market actors that are old, incumbent actors. They've been around for a while. They managed to repurpose existing grids, existing know-how, and so forth for the internet. Then came a lot of other services and somehow challenged their business models, but they still stand quite strong here. And then we have a lot of talk now about Starlink and other providers, but we'll see about that. This is an example for some of the comparisons we've done on the backbone market. So this shows submarine cables and IXPs, and then it shows actors delivering and controlling these different technologies, again divided into the different countries. And I don't have time to go into the data here. We wrote a whole book about this, and it's open access, so you can just dive right into all the visualizations. But it really shows that there are significant differences between these Nordic welfare states that to the public and in policymaking has been enforced as very similar contexts where everything is kind of the same and we did it the same way, and the Nordic is this very forward facing region that did a lot of good stuff, and we just see a lot of differences between these countries that are important to what it means to be a citizen in Norway compared to what it means to be a citizen in Denmark today or in Finland up towards the Russian border and so forth. Again, if we look at the application markets, this visualization is just, this is something, it looks at the most used apps and websites across these 4 Nordic countries, and then the providers of those apps and websites. So it shows a consolidation of a market in terms of providers that were manifold and looked very different 20 years ago compared to how it looks today. And that, of course, is a long history of buy-ups and a highly competitive market and so forth, but it very much goes against the idea of what we think the Nordic countries look like.
Yeah, and so something that we might add about that is that it's clear when comparing especially websites and the website ecosystem and the app ecosystem is that the degree of market concentration and globalization is much higher when we look at mobile apps than when we look at websites, which is interesting, I guess.
Yeah, so they more and more increasing mobile communication compared to web communication means also more and more market concentration in the Nordic region and in Myanmar for that sake. All right, this final visualization looks at the data part of the layer, and what we've done here is that we actually mixed the apps and the websites in one, and then we looked at the cookie calls, the domains, the SDKs for both types of application, and then at the market providers over at the end of the green line, and you can see Alphabet, Google as, of course, one of the very prevalent actors in this. This data is, we made this for the book 1.5 years ago, and it has only increased this image of who actually provides data services to the application layer, and also makes a lot of money from it that they then use in other industries, as we've heard about earlier today. There's big bucks in this. Right.
Yeah. So I guess we've reached some of the conclusions. What we have tried to explain that is that we work on 2 things mainly. Namely, one is to try to translate, both to understand ourselves and also to translate some of these technical matters that we need to be able to grasp a little bit of, at least, if we are to make sense of the societal challenges that we are facing and that we are increasingly discussing in public and in the political system. And what we hope to contribute to through this maneuver is to push the agenda around the so-called tech giants, or whatever we want to call them, towards also a greater attention to their role as infrastructure providers. So not only constantly discussing screens or content,
or
Chromebooks, but also understanding like the deeper roots of this infrastructural power that is still growing. And the other part is also what we have presented very briefly, of course, to you today, is basically methods developing. So what we are doing most of our time is to try to identify the the best empirical entry points for understanding these power structures and identify and develop methods that allow us to increase the monitoring of them and a more systematic monitoring. But what we constantly, the wall that we constantly hit, or the paradox perhaps, is that we are very much, no matter what we do, acting at the mercy of the objects we study. So I think we want to end up here with raising this as a point for discussion, actually, the fact that the data sources for making sense of and monitoring these systems are highly volatile. So the moment we have developed methods for monitoring, web traffic and the highest ranking websites, Amazon decides to close down Alexa that we had been using. So we need to find something else. And we have a wide range of examples of this. Also for the submarine data map, they used to have an open GitHub page where we could download the data. Now it's privatized and we need to purchase the data, and it's the same all the way around with all the data sources we used.
And if I may just add, this volatility, of course, also is expressed in some of the talks today, that there's a lot of data up here on these slides. We saw it this morning that sometimes the data sources are very divergent. Is it 5% or is it 55%? We really don't know a lot of the time because there is no real monitoring and it is so volatile. So it might be 5% one day and then 55% the other day, and we can't really confirm.
Yeah. But we're running out of time. So another problem and paradox, of course, is that the data sources that we use are most of them designed for many other purposes than ours. They're not designed for critical research. And of course, it's a question whether we need tools that are actually designed for this type of intervention instead of relying on the commercial sources. And finally, and related to that, of course, we are also constantly faced with the fact that using this kind of existing data, of course, means that the indicators and variables are predefined and only allow us to raise some research questions and not others. So that was it for us. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. That was a different look at our world. I think very useful. So thank you. We have time for 3 minutes of questions. Nina.
I'll take them all. No.
And could you say who you are and your current affiliation,
Yes,
etc.?
So hi, I'm Nina. I've been part of the folks who built the internet for the past 20 years. And I think this is an incredibly exciting job. I'm going to put it in job application after. But I was curious about one thing, and that was on your slide where you were talking about the backbone. That was either submarine cables or internet exchanges. That is a very, very rough division. And I wonder if you could just put a few words on how did you end up on those particular two groupings, or have you considered expanding it? I think, maybe 3 or 4 could be more suitable.
Yeah, I think it's a very easy question, easy answer. A difficult question with an easy answer here, namely that we have been doing what was possible. So the indicators that we have presented today are based on data sources that were available to us. And for instance, we haven't been able to, before today, which is exciting, we haven't been able to find similar databases of data centers, for instance. So, but of course, to answer the second part of your question, we are constantly looking for new indicators and ways of expanding it.
And also, we didn't include all the different indicators that we did use. So Sofie had like a month or something. It was a great month for you where you just coded ASNs. Day in and day out. I didn't see her at all. So there's a lot of different other stuff that we looked at, but didn't include here.
Yeah. Okay. So you had on your slide, you had a very good source of information about all of this telegeography, and of course it's a paid service. Yes. But I've used their database for years, and in many of the other slides you had, you could have pulled in data from telegeography as well. So you should look closer in that. But
yes,
I'd love to talk to you guys afterwards.
You too.
Thank you, Dieter.
And Nina is a really good person to talk about for this stuff because it's what she does.
Great.
But from the network side rather than social science.
I concur, definitely. I'm Lasse from Telia, and I want to thank you for being the people who remind all the politicians that what we do in this room is actually real. Thank you for that. And then regards to the access networks, what the information you have there, I think, is more on the service provider side. And in this group, we have both the fiber companies who dig out the fiber, and the service providers. The fiber companies usually have open networks, and then they have lots of service providers on top. So maybe what you're seeing is actually the service provider view, and actually not the access network view. So I think some of those resources that you have, the public resources, they also have some access network work that maybe I can point you to at some point.
Thank you.
Lasse.
Emil Petersen from Fiberby. As a network engineer, as a network engineer, we just have a big cable to Google and Amazon or whatever big provider, and that is fine. But as a human being, I'm sometimes thinking, what the hell, with some of the tracking and whatever other bad decisions are made against humans using these applications. So thank you to talk with the politicians about these things. As again, I just provide a internet that our customer wants. So what are we supposed to really do here? So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And a small round of applause, perhaps.
Wow. Thank you.
Great. Thank you again. It was a great talk, very useful. And please continue conversations with them.